Good morning. I will now call to order the May 11, 2022 Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Land Use Hearing. I will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everyone. We are holding this meeting in person and virtually. Today, we will consider ZDO 282, a proposed legislative amendment to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning and Development Ordinance related to housing. This hearing is a continuation of the hearing from April 27, 2022. Opportunity to present testimony was provided at that time. The record was held open until May 9, 2022 to allow individuals to submit additional written testimony. Today's hearing is for board deliberation and decision only. Staff will have an opportunity to briefly address issues that may have been identified in testimony submitted since the last hearing and will be available to answer additional questions that commissioners may have. Assisting us today is our County Administrator, Gary Schmidt, Clerk to the Board, Tony Mayernick, and Principal Planner, Martha Fritzie, and Assistant County Counsel, Nate Boderman. Gary, would you please introduce the item?
Yes, Chair Smith. So we'll have a brief staff presentation before your discussion. From Transportation and Development, Principal Planner Martha Fritzie will provide the presentation. Go ahead, please, Martha.
Thank you, and I promise I will be very brief. As you noted, this is a continued hearing, and at the last hearing, you left the written record open until 4 p.m. on Monday, this past Monday, May 9th. Shortly after that, you all should have received what I call Packet D. It is the 9 new exhibits, additional testimony that was received during that open record period. I think it's important to note that many of the comments were in support of middle housing, although some did ask for some additional changes. Staff is not at this point recommending any changes to the middle housing code amendments, and I'm certainly available, and Jennifer's available also to answer specific questions about the testimony if you have any. Staff has reviewed all of them and is certainly prepared to respond. There are a couple of additional changes that staff would recommend, which we classify really just as clarifying or technical fixes related to Ms. DeRosa's testimony in Exhibit 17. It really doesn't directly relate to middle housing, and it has to do with condominiums. We understand, certainly based on her testimony and from past conversations with Ms. DeRosa, that some of our language is very confusing in our zoning code, and we would propose to clarify that a little bit. It would not require another hearing. You could simply just be clear in your motion today, should you choose to approve the zoning code amendments, that it would be with these additional technical fixes related to condominiums.
Martha, the additional testimony that was submitted has asked us to do certain things. Are those allowed in House Bill 20001?
So, yes, all of the items, I assume you're referring to Oak Grove Community Council's testimony. All of the items are what we would consider the optional items under House Bill 2001. They all were items that were discussed during all of the public outreach. They were specific items that were brought forward to both the Planning Commission and the board for consideration. They are generally asking for things that would require some more flexibility. They're asking for more, essentially, than what we are doing under our codes, which we kind of call more of like a minimum compliance code. All of those things could be done. I don't think that all but 2 of those things would, if we were to make the code changes, would require another hearing. There are a few tweaks that we could make that would not require another hearing, and I can talk to you about specifically what those are.
I think you should.
Okay.
Because we allowed the testimony to be open for a delay, and I'm sorry to say we could have another delay, but I would like to know if those were brought forth during your initial look-see at this in the community, why didn't you bring those to us if they were allowed in law?
Well, they were discussed. And so you remember we did a large amount of public outreach, and we talked to a lot of different community planning organizations, and we heard a lot of requests. And so what we tried to do is take what we heard and create something that was the best fit in our code and that responded the best to all of the testimony that we've heard. And so some people want less, some people want more. And
I
so
see
we
what you're
tried to
saying.
find the middle ground.
Okay, so what the last bunch of emails that were submitted, is it fair to say those people want more?
Yes.
They want more allowances?
Yes.
They want more variances, they want more ability to do what they think is reasonable. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay, all righty. Commissioners, you want to continue on this line of questioning? What do you want to do about this?
Yeah, I just want to just kind of build on the point you were going with, Commissioner, and that was, what you were talking about in the context of staff's recommendation, what to include, not include, but you didn't mention the Planning Commission's work. So did they consider the same things that the chair asked you about?
Yes, they did.
Okay. So really, you accepted you brought to us the Planning Commission recommendation?
Yes.
Essentially? Okay.
Okay.
Just want to clarify that.
Yeah, that's a good question, very good question to know.
So what were the reasons maybe that were discussed that dismissed those changes that are suggested in the Oak Grove Community Council?
So I'm going to have to look down
What was
at,
the rationale?
so a couple of things were discussed in their recommendations. One is this idea of detached plexes, and this is something that has been discussed in other jurisdictions. It was discussed through rulemaking, and it was this conversation of, do we require plexes to be attached units, or do we just allow multiple detached units on a property and call it a detached plex? And so we received a lot of opinions, both for and against something like that. And so we landed on this idea of not allowing at this time a detached plex because of feedback that we heard about concerns about impacting more of the land, impacting more of the open space on the land, and essentially what it would end up creating, because those properties would then be allowed to be divided with the Middle Housing Land Division. Essentially, all it's doing is creating much smaller lot, single-family dwellings, and it seems to a number of people a little bit counter to this idea of middle housing. So that's where we landed. As of right now, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes in the proposed amendments have to be attached. It's important to note that you could build 2 detached units on a property, a single-family home and an ADU. You can do that now. You could build a cottage cluster, which are detached units, if there's 4 or more. So really, when you're looking at like 3 units, that's sort of where we essentially come up short. It is also important to note that we are making this decision now, and we have committed to tracking and seeing how this is going. And as we all know, zoning codes can change, and if it becomes apparent that this is something that we need to discuss in the future and potentially allow for, we could do something. We could expand on the allowances for middle housing in the future. I mean, for any of these things, quite frankly.
Right.
Some of the other things that were brought up were allowing on-street parking or more flexibility with parking. We heard very loud and clear from most of the members of the public that it was very important to require parking, as much parking as possible off-street for each of these developments. And so that's what we went with in our codes.
Okay. And, I know the answer, but just want to, just for everyone listening, and just make another point. So these, by doing this, whether they're detached or whether it's a fourplex on a common foundation, whatever it may be, these are all, we're not dividing the land. These are still all under the same title, property title, fee simple property title. We're not dividing individual properties by doing this. So the bill doesn't, HB 2001 does not, correct?
HB 2001 does not, but the subsequent legislation, Senate Bill 458 in 2021, requires us to allow people to further divide the property that's built with middle housing. It's called a middle housing land division in our code. So yes, we do have to allow that to be divided now.
Okay. So how, getting back to the, is it DeRosa? Is that how to pronounce it? Getting back
I
to
think
their
so.
letter with the condo aspect of it, is that easily done on a common foundation where you can divide it? I mean, on this 458, this bill you mentioned, does that divide a fourplex into four ownerships, let's say a fourplex? Or is it actually just still one, because on a common foundation, is it still one title?
No, condominiums are an ownership regime, right? And so it's not a land division mechanism. And so think of those separately. And so the issues specifically pertaining to condominiums are how you sort of separate out the ownerships of those individual living units rather than actually dividing separate units of land. Does that make sense, that distinction?
Well, I mean, well, no. Maybe I missed part of what you said. I wasn't concentrating, but so if, let's just say it's a fourplex, one could say on a common foundation, one could say, you could condoize that, right, in a sense? And it's condoizing a separate title for each of those four segments.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And 458 allows that.
All right, we have other commissioners. Commissioner
458
Fisher,
has
you're
nothing
up.
to do with condos,
Okay.
correct?
Right, 458 allows a regular land division.
Okay.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, so this first recommendation in the testimony about when developing middle housing, particularly when it creates opportunities to integrate existing trees or vegetation into the development, than to allow detached plexes. I mean, in that situation, I think that just makes sense, that if there were that would be allowed if they're to maintain the trees, to maintain the vegetation. Couldn't there be some sort of exception that could be applied for when requesting this?
Well, theoretically, yes. Of course, we are allowed to do that. If we were to decide to go down that road at this point, we would have to, sorry, that was me, the other one wasn't. We would have to create some new code language, and I believe, and Nate can help me out here, that it would, because it would be such a substantive change, it would require another hearing and potentially additional public testimony. But yes, we could do it, or we could do it sometime in the future if we decided that was more appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I would just hate to see a situation where middle housing is used to make it more, the word in my mind is congregate. I don't know if that's the correct land use word, but all together and getting rid of trees in order to do that versus if it makes sense to have it be detached so that you could maintain the natural landscape. It's kind of a no-brainer to me that would be something that we would value in our code. So that was one. And then this other stuff, permit triplexes and quadplexes outright on any lot where single detached dwellings or duplexes are allowed. So I thought that they were under middle housing. So this really confuses me.
So this is a reference to the minimum lot size. And so we had a lot of conversations about whether or not we should establish a minimum lot size for certain middle housing types. We had some conversations with you all at a policy session or two, with the Planning Commission, also through our public outreach. And we overwhelmingly heard, yes, establish a minimum lot size for the middle housing types that you can establish one for. So yes, in theory, a triplex and quadplex is allowed anywhere in those zoning districts. Remember that map with the yellow that I keep showing? But to actually develop it, there is a minimum lot size. So you have to have at least a 5,000 square foot lot in order to get a triplex, is what the code says. It's what state law allows. And that's what we had heard recommended to us that we should do through the public outreach and all of our other conversations.
Okay, and they're just saying, don't have any requirements for lot
Right.
sizes.
Right.
And then the question about permit up to 2 accessory dwelling units on any lot developed with a single detached dwelling, what would be the concern against that?
Well, nothing that we're doing in the Middle Housing Code is changing anything about accessory dwelling units. Currently, you can have one accessory dwelling unit. It's not part of the proposal, and this is one of those changes that, again, would require us to potentially renotice, since it was not something part of the original proposal, and hold at least one more hearing.
So an accessory dwelling unit, could that be considered a tiny home on a property? Or would that be something different?
Yes, as long as it's built on a foundation and meets, building codes for a stick-built house.
Okay, so an accessory dwelling unit it's another stick-built house?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions for now. I don't know if, these recommendations are great. I appreciate the Joseph Edge providing this for us in that group. And Paul, you're probably more connected with this group, given that you're live closer in the area.
Well, yeah, I sat in on the meeting where they discussed that, but I did not sit on the meeting where they crafted the letter, so that's.
Paul, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. So the part I'm struggling with, a detached triplex, fourplex, duplex. So, I mean, I don't know if it's just trying to wiggle around the language of HB 2001, but what's the difference between allowing 2 ADUs on a property and a detached duplex?
Well, or a detached triplex, because then you're talking about 3 units on a property,
Well,
like a
if
single-family home and an
you have 2
ADU.
ADUs,
Well, you have to have a primary home also to have an ADU.
right, so let's just say that you have a primary home.
Okay.
And there's 2 ADUs allowed, okay? So what's the difference between 2 ADUs and a detached duplex?
That's a very good question. All the lines start to kind of get fuzzy at that point, right? And so there's 2 main differences, I guess, at this point, if we were to do it. One is that an ADU cannot be larger than 900 square feet, whereas a plex, there's no maximum size. We cannot require additional parking for ADUs, whereas for a plex, we could. Those really, I think, would be the only 2 differences.
Okay, all right. Good answer.
As you were talking, Commissioners, I was making a few notes here. HB 2001 makes land more dense for housing. Isn't that the overall goal? Existing land, we can put more houses
Yes.
on the land we have. That is the purpose, correct? And this was correct?
Yes, I mean,
Was
that's
that-
one of
was-
the purposes, yes.
Well, okay, what's the
Yes.
other purpose? Just, let's 30,000-foot level, what is the other purpose?
To allow for more variety of housing that should be a little bit less expensive, to
So
allow more access to
affordability in
certain
housing,
neighborhoods.
allow for more homes and affordability in housing, that's the overarching goal. So when somebody brought up, I don't remember who, the minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet for a triplex, do you realize how small 5,000 square feet is for a triplex and have a car and 3 cars parked there? That is very, very small. You don't have room for hardly anything. I mean, you won't have a yard, probably. If you have any kids running around, I would not want to raise my family on a 5,000 square foot triplex, 5,000 square foot lot with a triplex. So that is very small. As far as trees, I don't know what to tell you, Commissioner Fisher. Yes, people like their trees in Clackamas County. We all like our trees in Oregon. I suppose if you could make trees work, it's up to them. There's a lot that can be said about this, and I understand the testimony that was submitted. There's a lot of stuff that came in at the last minute. I'm going to recommend that we give this a try for a year. We pass this as it is for a year. If we have a barrage of applicants that come in, and I'd like staff just to keep track, if we think that there needs to be an adjustment, I suggest we revisit the ZDOs in a year during our comprehensive zone change meeting that we have and take a look at that stuff. I would like to pass this as it is and just see what happens. And that's about the best we can do. I think all jurisdictions are probably struggling with this. We're not alone in this. And let's see if, a whole bunch of people come breaking our doors down to try to do this. I think it is going to go slow. I just do. It was projected from staff in the Legislative Fiscal Office that we'd probably have 1% growth rate, maybe, in most areas, up to a 3% growth rate in areas of Happy Valley, where there's larger lots to be had. We have 2 more commissioners in the queue, Commissioner Scholl and then Commissioner Savas.
Yes, I'm concerned, as are many constituents, about the impact on our streets from middle housing. So as we go forward, are you going to be critical of the potential impacts on streets designed for existing density that are going to be overstressed by the increased traffic from middle housing? Because this is a big issue for many people, and resisting the idea of middle housing coming to their neighborhoods. The tree thing is another thing. We cannot build, quadplexes and triplexes on small lots without affecting trees. I mean, there's trees are going to come down with this project. We can be sensitive. And builders might have an increased ability to avoid taking down trees if those triplex and quadplexes can be detached and moved around, sited on the site with some finesse to save trees. But anyway, again, I bring this up because I hear it from so many people. What are you going to do to keep an eye on the potential negative impacts on quiet residential streets when middle housing goes in?
So I'm not sure I can specifically address quiet residential streets, but I can say that, and I don't know if Karen would have anything to add, but we periodically update our transportation system plan. And moving forward, all of our analyses that go into the traffic modeling are going to have to factor in what's happening with middle housing. I'm not sure how we're going to do that exactly. I think all the jurisdictions are going to have to figure that out. But it is something that we look at periodically every few years. I don't know the exact timeframes, but we will certainly be considering that as we look at our transportation system plan.
Yeah, okay, let me just add that we have little ability to change existing residential streets. I mean, that's almost an impossibility to do. So I just bring this up and ask you to, just as we go forward, be very sensitive to the potential impacts on our streets.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, appreciate Commissioner Scholl's concern about that. And I think it's not just that, but also the impacts upon the neighborhoods in general, and where I'm going to go with this. And I'm not trying to make a joke or anything when I say this, but just imagine if there's a fourplex on there, whether it's attached or detached, and they're all short-term rentals. I mean, we've got a potential for more impacts, and so I'm not just throwing that out there. It's just a concern about the livability, and certainly we're hearing a lot. I expect when we have our hearing on short-term rentals, we're going to hear a lot more about neighborhood impacts, but I think that is a concern that I hear repeatedly, as well as the parking, which is already having impacts today. I don't know. So refresh my memory, Martha. Are 2 ADUs allowed, or is this allow 2 ADUs?
No. 1 ADU is allowed currently, and we're not proposing to change that.
Okay. All right. I guess it's really up to the appetite of us whether or not we want to allow detached or not in the hearing. If the parking requirements remain the same, then I'm not too concerned.
I didn't understand your statement. If we allow detached, do we have a choice?
No, I guess the question today is, do we want to allow to have them detached, detached duplexes, quad, or triplexes? Is that what it is? Is it all three?
That is one of the recommendations, but again, that kind of a change is a pretty significant or substantive change to the proposal, and we would have to come back to you for another hearing.
Right, but either way, if we did it or didn't do it, the parking requirements are the same.
Yes.
Which we all objected to. We didn't like that at all, but this was what the legislature passed. So what we're trying to do here, and I hope people realize, we're trying to do the very best we can with a really bad hand we've been dealt with. It is not our value system in Clackamas County to reduce the livability by not allowing parking, cutting our trees down, bad streets that are heavily impacted with very little road fund to deal with the increased traffic and wear and tear on our roads. So we're doing the best we can. That's why I make the recommendation that we pass it as is today, and in a year, we could possibly come back from the time of implementation, not today's date, obviously, to see how it's playing out in the community and be very open-minded if there is indeed anything else we can do to tweak this, to be more flexible with what we're hearing in the community. Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, one of the other recommendations, which I've heard not just in this context, but all the time as a county commissioner, is fee in lieu, FFELO, which is fee in lieu of, meaning when there's middle housing, you can reduce certain fees for certain outcomes. Have we thought about that as well?
Sidewalks?
We have. We've had a lot of conversations about sidewalk requirements and FELO. Again, through our public outreach, and through our surveys, those were some of the questions that we've asked with the Planning Commission and with the board at policy sessions. And I think it's one of those issues where there's very, very strong feelings on both sides. We've heard from a lot of people that we should make everybody build the sidewalks and we shouldn't allow FELO. And we've heard from some people that we should allow more types of housing to qualify for FELO. And so we landed in the middle with this as well, and we're proposing not to make any changes to FELO. And so what that would mean for the middle housing is that middle housing with 3 or fewer units, just like any other type of housing right now with 3 or fewer units, could qualify for the FELO. There are some things that would make it qualify in terms of location. Any housing with 4 or more units or 4 or more lots would have to build the infrastructure and would not be allowed to pay the FELO. That's how our code works right now. We're not proposing a change for it.
Okay. Any further questions?
I guess where I'm kind of landing with all of this and thinking about it and studying it and listening to the conversation today is I would be okay having one more hearing to talk about detached, just having the option for, if it's appropriate, if it preserves another interest. And I'm also would be okay with 2 accessory dwelling units. Those 2 things I would be okay with adding to our scheme.
Commissioner Fisher and then Commissioner Scholl. Excuse me, Commissioner Savas, I beg your pardon.
So maybe I don't agree, I think, on this one with Commissioner Fisher, and that is if you recall, when we had last discussed this, wanted to really kind of go for a walk, right? The community.
Why didn't we do that?
Yeah, and that never came to be. I thought it would be organized by staff, but it did. I'm not blaming anyone at this point. But the reason is, I think the other thing, I think that was almost, to me, it would have been fantastic. But if you all watched the video, the news clip that was on a couple of the TV channels on that downpour in Oak Grove, and you could see the torrent of water running right alongside a mobile home park, and then the manhole covers
Popping up.
bouncing off. When you watch that, that's where I wanted to take you, to some of those vulnerable areas where this drainage issue and sidewalks, which are part of the drainage system, is such a big deal. So that's why I've been not a big fan of FELO, because it really doesn't develop the infrastructure. And so with that as a segue into the other thing in the DeRosa letter, input here is that, you know, this conundrum between people wanting to have the SDCs waived or cost waived, right, to make the housing more affordable, and yet we have this area where this is, with HB 2001 applies to, which is miserably failing when it comes to walkability, sidewalks, drainage, and all those things. So there's transit, for example. So all the things that we really, really need, you know, cost money, and yet at the same token, there's this push to make things more affordable, which it just seems to me that we're not really building the quality neighborhoods that we really want, and we're just aggravating the situation. So I just want to just point out that conundrum. And I thought, again, that's the reason that we ought to be challenging HB 2001. We got to do what we got to do within the timeline, but those are the two things that, you know, I came away with, that it's, I just can't go there to adding more ADUs, waiving the parking requirements, having philo in there. We're creating unsafe, especially for people, for those that are disabled or want to use a sidewalk or be safe. We're forcing people out in the street on unimproved roads.
Commissioner Stevens, could you link for me, for my brain, the connection between your comments about ADUs, and how that applies to philo?
Well, the ADUs waive the parking requirement.
Okay, and then, but
Which
the
exacerbates the
fee in
street
lieu
requirement.
of, in my mind, is for sidewalks, that you can pay a fee instead of doing the improvement. So how are those two things related?
Well, where do you park? You park along a curb, right? And you park safely, and there's line of sight. And also, when you put in a curb or a sidewalk, you're also going to be doing the drainage aspects as well. So you're not just doing a sidewalk.
Okay.
You have to make some accommodation for the drainage as well. So it's a twofer.
Okay, so Martha, help me understand. If you had more accessory dwelling units, you wouldn't have to have sidewalks?
No, you don't have to have parking.
You don't have to have off-street parking associated with the ADU, and so if somebody has a car, they would park on the street if no additional parking was required.
They would park in the mud or the shoulder of the road with no sidewalk, no way for anyone that's disabled to safely move from one property to another property other than in the public street where people drive their cars. Extremely dangerous.
Okay, we have a couple more commissioners who haven't spoke yet. Commissioner Scholl and then Commissioner Schrader. And then we're going to move this along. I'm going to make a statement.
If we approve ZDO 282 today, we're not waiving parking requirements.
No, we're not.
And we can also revisit the issue about detached triplexes
Yes.
in the future. So I think we ought to just go ahead and move along and approve this today.
Commissioner Schrader?
I did like your opinion, Chair Smith. I do think, given all the time that staff has spent on this, and I think we were really, was a positive thing to let the folks keep it open for another week so they could have comments that we could look at and read and try and understand. We're not going to have perfection with this at this point. I think that staff has done the best, absolutely a fantastic job. I think the notion of moving forward with this today and taking a look in a year when we can really see, number one, what the impacts are and the questions that we're asking today about the livability and the impact on communities. There's no doubt that this is really a top-down mandate, dealing with intensification. And once again, as the local governing body, we are having to grapple with questions of trees and landscaping and all these things. So, but I am prepared to support this as written today and suggest a date certain. And what I would encourage us to do is to make a list of all these concerns that we still have. So maybe we do bring it back even sooner. Maybe we bring it back in 6 months. But let's at least get some, I mean, that's doable. Let's move ahead so we can get this at least finished for now with the anticipation of assessing the impacts on our communities. I agree with Commissioner Savas. I'm not convinced that densification of this kind is really going to improve the livability of our communities or the smallness of the spaces and all of those, the kinds of things that we're talking about. But under the circumstances, I believe we need to move forward and just honor, from my perspective, honor the work that the staff has done. We've already kind of put it off once, and I think that, quite frankly, I think our staff needs to move on to other things that are just as pressing as this particular one.
Good point.
I
Thank
think
you.
it's as right as we can get it at this point.
I'm going to make a statement as a correction. Somebody up here said that we are doing this. We are not doing this. Okay, this is a legislative mandate, and if we don't act on this by the end of June, the state law is going to come into effect, which will be much worse. We need to get on this today. We need to move forward. We are running out of time. And also, it costs a considerable amount of many, many thousands of dollars every time we convene one of these hearings with our staff. So with that in mind, I'm going to entertain a motion. Commissioner Scholl.
I move we approve ZDO 282 as recommended by the staff.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Scholl has made a motion that we approve ZDO 282 as recommended by staff. It has been seconded by Commissioner Schrader. The whole panel has lit up.
And actually, it was lit before you actually.
I know, and I also made the statement that we're going to move on with this. Commissioners, you can sit here and talk all day long, but I do have the attorney who wants to speak right now.
I just want a clarification on the motion. And so the motion that was recommended in the script was as recommended by staff. And I just want to be
Yes.
crystal clear that staff's recommendation is what was
That's what
presented.
Commissioner Scholl said. If I didn't repeat it right, I'll repeat it.
Oh, no. You repeated it correctly. I just want to make sure that the 5 commissioners understand what that motion entails, because it is not only the recommendation that was presented at the first meeting, but it includes the additions or the modification to the condominium language that staff described here today.
Okay. Okay, now, Commissioner Savas, and then Commissioner Fisher, you're up.
So we talked about Philo, and so my question is that if the board, let's say, passes the motion here today that's on the table, and a month from now or 6 months from now decides we're going to eliminate Philo, there's no entanglement with this, what we're doing here today. We can just eliminate it. They're not linked. Or are they linked?
That's correct. The only thing you cannot do is treat middle housing differently than, or duplexes differently than single family.
Okay,
But you could eliminate it completely if you decided to.
yep. I would feel far more comfortable if that was on the horizon.
Could be.
And maybe that would be another justification to follow through with the little walk through this
Well,
area that we're talking about.
And I have done walk with constituents out there, and I understand what you're talking about on waiving infrastructure. I've seen a lot of it as well, and I know what you're talking about. I understand where you're coming from on that. It's a whole different discussion beyond today. Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Smith. I really appreciated what Commissioner Schrader said about bringing this back just to look at impacts and how this is going and reconsidering in a year. I would like to propose that we just amend the motion to incorporate her suggestions, and then I think we will probably all get there with a 5-0 vote. I think that our responsibility here our number one job, which I think we all agree with, is to quality of life for our community. And those, that value is so important. It is imperative upon us to keep our eye on this and to.
I'd like an opinion from council on that.
Well, if you want it to be certainly inactionable.
Please speak up, Nate. Thank you.
My pleasure. If you want it to be an actionable item, certainly make it a part of your motion. I mean, I think what staff is hearing here is that there is a desire for you to revisit this in a year, and so I think it would come back to you, whether it was in the formal motion or not, but
Well, I
certainly
think
if
it's
you'd like to
going to come
amend,
back
you can.
regardless, but let's say that the motion makes it mandatory that it comes back in a year. Let's say not much has happened in a year.
Well, we know that.
So, the adverse could happen. So I'm not willing to amend the motion at this time to make it mandatory that we revisit this in 1 year. I think the motion stands as it is, should be passed. If issues arise, for instance, like fee in lieu of, Commissioner Savas, if that comes up through another type of land use discussion, we can do that. But I think we need to make a decision on the motion that's on the table now. Commissioner Scholl.
Your documentation indicates that your outlook on these projects are going to be very slow in coming. I don't think this is going to be like the Oklahoma land rush. And so I don't think we're going to be overwhelmed with middle housing projects coming in. We're going to have time to move along slowly, cautiously, and in a sensitive way. So we can look
We
at
could
this in the
have an
future when
update. Yeah, we
time
could have an
comes.
update in 6 months.
Let's
We
go with the
can have
motion
a
as it is.
15-minute update in 6 months. Gee, what's it looking like for applications? What are the concerns, if any? We could do something like that, but we really need to let something as comprehensive of this, I think, take effect. And you know what, Commissioners? There's going to be a change in the legislature. They could go in and make changes that severely affect what we're passing today. So we're not just operating in our own little bubble with this. In fact, I hope that does happen. I hope the legislature goes back and takes a look at, oh, gee, we're taking away local control, we're taking away livability standards in some of these neighborhoods by trying to inflict more density, by trying to inflict what we think is affordable housing. But is it really? I would submit this is not as affordable housing as what the intent of the legislation is. So with that in mind, Tony, I'm going to call for a vote. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair. Commissioner Fisher?
No.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
I
Commissioner Savas?
No.
Chair Smith?
Aye. Motion passes 3-2. Thank you very much, staff, for coming forward on this today. I have my script in front of me. Now that the proposal has been approved, I will direct staff to draft an ordinance reflecting this decision and include it on the agenda for this board's adoption at a future business meeting. Is that all I need to say right now?
Yes, we will have the ordinance come before you here in the next couple weeks.
Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I just want to say, Commissioner Smith, we did need to move forward today. I felt very strongly about this. As far as a motion, quite frankly, I think the fact that we've discussed it, and I'm a big believer in legislative intent, because we do legislate, that we have gotten it on the record, that as this moves forward, we will revisit. So I am not concerned about that piece of it. I do believe that will happen, and we will do our due diligence with this. But thank you, Commissioner Fisher. I know you want to codify a little more, but we've got it on the record, so we'll be able to move forward with it. Okay?
I agree with Commissioner Schrader on that. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, I just want to say that the middle housing idea is a Band-Aid on the critical shortage of residential housing in our state and in our county. And until such time that our legislature sees that and takes action to remedy the restrictive land use laws that restrict our ability to build new housing, we're going to continue to suffer.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioners. I am going to adjourn this public hearing. Commissioners, we're already 15 minutes behind schedule. We have policy sessions coming up. We're going to take a 5-minute recess, and I will promptly reconvene this meeting at 10:50. Thank you.
You read mine.